Vice Chair of the Audit Committee.
Councillor Rita for Canning North.
Independent counsel from Bowling Ward, Mahmood Mirza.
Welcome. And we also have Conrad Hall joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Conrad Hall. I'm the Council's Corporate Director of Resources. I'm here principally for the item on risk, but just more generally, if there's anything that I can assist with.
And also I note a surprise additional attendee from the committee, our independent member, Paul Leslie. Would you like to introduce yourself on the Zoom?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Leslie and I'm representing the voluntary sector.
We also have Councillor Ali.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, colleague. I'm Councillor Zulfikar Ali, Cabinet Lead for Finance and Resources, and the Ward Councillor for Plaster North. Good to see you all this evening.
And I'm also seeing Fiona Marsh on the Zoom. Can you just clarify which item you're here to attend?
This was about working with the Audit Committee, the Scrutiny and the Audit Committee, working together more closely.
Okay, that will be the second item we'll be coming to, so we'll probably be getting to that in about half an hour.
Oh, okay.
You're welcome to stay, should you wish, while we go through the first item on the agenda and our housekeeping.
Okay, I'll just go on mute and come back in when you're ready at the half past.
Fantastic.
I need to still keep an eye, because unless you're going to call me in, so I'll go off. Okay.
Okay, so apologies for absence have been received tonight from Councillor Anthony McCormont, Councillor Thelma Odoy and Councillor Elizabeth Booker. Have you received any other apologies? Next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do members of the committee?
Okay, may I say the Mayor, Roxana Fiaz, had already informed the scrutiny team for her apologies as she's on leave from today.
Okay.
Sorry for interruption.
So item 3, declarations of interest. Do members of the committee have any disclosable pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests they wish to declare on any matter being considered at this meeting on the agenda? Okay, that will be noted. So item 4, minutes. So the purpose of this item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October 2023. Does anyone have any points they want to raise regarding these minutes? Councillor Chada.
On page 6, it said it was found that it was not the practice of the council to develop to practice an ethnically driven approach in service provision. Could we just go back and check that, because that doesn't sound familiar with my recollection, and I think it may be sort of inappropriately phrased.
Sorry, which point is this?
Page 6.
Yeah.
The minutes. Let me find the exact paragraph. I think it's. Sorry.
I can't see it in my minutes at the moment. Can we clarify that outside of the meeting?
Yep.
Fantastic.
And then I think on page 7, there's a repetition of the point about the Asian Bangladeshi community.
Yeah.
So a repetition on engagement with the voluntaries.
Yeah, I picked this up. This is on pages 12 and 13. And I've already raised this issue with Michael, so we're going to take it outside of the minutes. Were there any other points?
No, Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the committee happy to accept the minutes of the correct record subject to the changes that we sort of previously discussed that will be taking place outside of the meeting? Agreed. Fantastic. So moving on to the first substantive item, item 5, Newham Council's communication strategy. So the purpose of this item is to review Newham Council's communication strategy to include consideration of branding and the delivery of the brand, as well as the vehicles for communications with residents. In the light of the recent Centre for Governance and Scrutiny report, I'd just like the minutes to note for the record and as a matter of concern that not attending tonight are the portfolio lead for this area, as already mentioned by Councillor Ali. Can I just check that this is indeed Mayor Fiaz?
Were you asking me or Councillor Ali? Sorry.
I'm asking anyone who wants to answer. Can I just check that Mayor Fiaz is indeed the cabinet lead for communications? I think that's a nod from Councillor Ali.
Yeah. And can I say, Chair, that James Partis, the Assistant Chief Executive, is here to talk.
Yeah, I understand that James Partis is attending as lead officer for the item. I also note that neither the manager of the external affairs nor brand and marketing team, two of the three teams that make up our communications team, have chosen to attend. Again, can I just check for the minutes that the names of those officers are Maxine McKenzie for brand and marketing and Ashley Wilcox for external affairs. And also for the record, the third strand of our communication response, policy research and partnerships, is currently recruiting for a new head. And the overall control of our communications team, the position of Chief Marketing Officer, is also currently awaiting its new incumbent, if I've read my agenda correctly. However, we're delighted, as Councillor Ali mentioned, to welcome James Partis as Assistant Chief Executive and Chief Transformation Officer. James, do you have any brief opening remarks? Our committee's been furnished with a lot of information regarding your team, so there's no need to duplicate that. But if you could give us a brief summary of the structure and strategic aims for the benefits of anyone watching online or in the room tonight, that would be really helpful.
Of course, thank you, Chair. I'll keep this brief. And just in regards to the apologies offered by Ashley Wilcox and Maxine McKenzie, I can confirm they are the lead officers for those two of the three areas you've listed relevant to communications. They're both on planned leave, unfortunately, and I'll do my best to kind of introduce and summarise the item. By way of personal introduction, I'm temporarily overseeing the communications function following the departure of the Chief Marketing Officer, which is a role that actually has been appointed to, and it will be an appointment with that individual who's been appointed to that role will start in March of 2024. So just to kind of give you context as to sort of my role and remit in relation to the paper and the function. I won't go through the paper in detail, but what the paper endeavours to do is both sort of set out the overall kind of story of the kind of improvement journey around communications and engagement over the last 3 to 4 years. It lists the sort of major kind of priorities that have driven that improvement journey, particularly focusing on the kind of work that's been undertaken around the building a fairer new and corporate plan and the work that's been undertaken around the council's brand and brand reset. And you'll note from the papers themselves that there's a sort of programme structure which the team have been working through. The other kind of key things to highlight are the sort of quite significant developments that have followed that improvement, particularly in relation to that particular, the brand reset projects. There are a few examples of the sort of products that are now being deployed across the council as part of that, and also a listing of some of the major sort of communications achievements and milestones in the last period. You'll find those kind of listed in the earlier part of the report. One thing I would add is you'll note from the paper itself that further data was being sought in relation to the staffing turnover key line of inquiry. I do have some further information on that available to me today. I'm very happy to supply that data and insight directly to the committee in writing following the meeting, if that's helpful. But the overall position on that, and I'm happy to go through the detail if there's specific interest in it, is the turnover in the service has been higher than the council average, but has been the rate of turnover has been reducing over the last 3 years. I think the turnover rate for the current year is somewhere in the region of 25%. So I'm very happy to kind of go back on more detail on that if there's specific interest from the committee. But I just wanted to clarify, given that wasn't included as evidence in the original paper, that data is now available and can be offered. The final kind of aspect of the report to highlight is there's a range of sort of quite detailed responses to questions in relation to our channels, relating to not only the New and Mag, but our digital channels of communication, the sort of oversight and governance arrangements over those sorts of channels, and particular questions relating to digital communications and our approach to managing, for example, Twitter, X, Facebook, and other platforms, which I won't repeat, but that's all sort of set out in the latter half of the report. I'll probably conclude my summary there, just in interest of time, and very happy to sort of take direct questions on the report or any substantive matters relating to it.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. So I'd now like to go to questions from the committee. Does anyone want to lead off on this? So Councillor Chadha I saw first, and Councillor Mirza, and Councillor Paul.
I've got a series of questions, but in the interest of time, I'll ask two to begin with.
Okay.
So can we go back on the issue of HR and the post as it's supported at the moment? You said you've got the data, because I think the committee specifically asked if you could share that, James. That'd be extremely helpful. My second point, related to HR, is that it says that one of the goals of the communication strategy is actually to attract talent to Newham, and that's a laudable ambition. But how does that sit against the fact that 20% of staff leave within the first year of employment in the council, and what progress is being made to address that? And my second series of questions, James, relates more to data. The report talks about a food feedback loop and data-driven complaints, and using the communication strategy to manage that. Do we have the resources to do that? Do we have any metrics on our leadership, our reach? Because the report's very good in detail about explaining what the media channels are, but it doesn't provide us with any of the data about how effective we are. When can we expect to receive that, or is that work in progress? Sorry, quite a lot there.
No, that's great. Thanks for the questions, Councillor. And I've just been busily writing them down, so I'll make sure I come back to them in turn. Chair, would it be helpful if I come directly back on those?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Very happy to share the data on turnover. Just happy to confirm that formally as part of the minutes. On the second question in relation to talent retention, it's a real challenge for communications teams generally across sectors, public sector and private sector. It's a highly transferable set of skills, which many organisations kind of very much competitively source. And I think Newham isn't, what I would say is Newham is no exception to that sort of challenge around talent retention and the battle for talent. The kind of turnover rate of 25%, it is higher than the organisational average, which sits around 10 to 15%. But I would say that average kind of belies a whole range of other outliers where we do know that the market is extremely competitive. I'd sort of cite technical specialists, ICT specialists, town planners or otherwise, where we know there's a significant battle for talent. I'd say one of the competitive...
Sorry, could I just interrupt there?
Yes.
For clarification, you said that you provide us with the information on HR issues for the minutes. So does that mean you don't have them this evening? Sorry,
I do, yeah. So I've got them with me.
So I think the question was how many communication leads there been in the last 5 years?
Okay, so in terms of the communications leads for the roles that are PO6 and above, which are the sort of communications leads in the last 5 years, I'll just list out a few stats for you. So from December 21 to December 22, the total number of individuals at that level in the team was 8. The number of leavers at that level in that year was 6. So that was a very high turnover year. That was a year of restructure and redesign. That represents something in the region of 75% turnover. For the year of 21 to 22, ending 22, sorry, a number of individuals in PO6 roles was 8. The structure was unchanged after that point. Number of leavers was 5 in that year. That's a slightly lower turnover at that level, but still high. And then from December 22 to December 23, the total number of individuals in roles at PO6 and above was 11. Number of leavers in that period was 4. So that's a reduction in the turnover down to something in the region of 40%. So at the leadership level, there certainly is a higher level of turnover when compared with the overall service average of 25%.
James, can I just come in with a quick supplementary to Rita's question before we move on? What worries me is in the papers, you talk about people honing their skills in Newham and how this is a positive thing because it brings fresh blood in, and you refer to the team naturally refreshing itself over time. But how does this square with stabilising the team, building local knowledge and building the kind of important relationships that are absolutely at the heart of good communications?
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent question. And one thing I was going to come on to in terms of the sort of competitive advantage for Newham and the sort of stability that's now being established despite the continued high turnover. One of the key things I would say, and this is often reported by new joiners into the organisation, particularly in the communications department, but more widely, the sorts of initiatives that the team are planning to prioritise over the next couple of years are genuinely innovative. Particularly the sort of brand reset programme. There's very few organisations that are thinking about building a relationship with residents in a way that the council is in Newham. And in fact, it's a kind of really good career builder for many communication specialists to consider getting involved in the comms team at Newham for that very reason.
But they're not sticking around, James.
Yeah, one thing I would say, just as a kind of measure of optimism, which I do recognise is optimistic, is the trend has been improving around turnover. So if you just recall those stats I read out, I think the team has gone through substantial redesign, restructure. The latest year stats do give, what personally would give me more cause for optimism, particularly around the fact that a significant proportion of staff are now staying beyond the 1 year point and into the 2nd year point. I'd point again to the Chief Marketing Officer appointment planned in the new year, permanent appointment. That's not been a role that we've permanently appointed to yet. It's been covered on an interim basis for the last year. I would draw some comfort from the fact that permanent appointment, it's a really important pivotal role, should start to bring some of stability, which I completely acknowledge has been an issue for the structure and is certainly an industry-wide issue.
Do you want to come back on that, Rita, quickly before we get on to your second question?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is you've got a very ambitious plan, you've got the manifesto commitments, but we haven't got the resources to actually deliver something. Is that right?
I think that has been a historic issue, particularly over the last couple of years. You'll note from the paper, particularly around the sort of level of kind of resource that the council has to deploy across, particularly the advertising channels, the range of different platforms such as our kind of major billboards, our digital content, Newham magazine. It is a stretching and challenging brief. One of the key things which I think will start to address the resource challenges, which I think you're completely right in flagging, and I think it's resource challenges are experienced in a number of corporate teams at the moment, is the greater focus on better understanding the data and insight that drives better outcomes for comms. And it has been a gap in the sort of capability of the service previously. What we need to do is...
So just moving on to Rita's second question then.
Chair, can I if that's the case, and actually we are now at the period of change and stabilisation of the team, bearing in mind that we've got severe budget cuts coming up, is it worth actually, this looks like it's a period of growth, it's an area of growth for the council. Is it worth thinking again about what that means in terms of the budget? Do we need to grow the comms team and the external affairs and marketing team, which is being very expansive? Or are we best just staying those vacant posts at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question. I know as part of internal conversations that are taking place across all services at the moment that a range of savings alternatives and options are being considered across all services, and the communications department is not an exception at all. I think all council departments, in light of the kind of significant corporate budget challenges that we're facing, are considering whether or not kind of the current level of resourcing is what we can afford as an organisation, but also considering whether the scope of work and the breadth of our plans are realistic and feasible in light of those future budget challenges. I do know that and Conrad may want to come in at this point, but the sort of programme and timetable for bringing those considerations to Cabinet will quickly come to Cabinet and to scrutiny in due course. And I wouldn't say that this department is any way different from any other department that's considering those savings options. The last thing I'll just add is on that data and insight point. I do think that is a critical enabler for becoming more efficient, particularly in the comms team. Getting a better understanding of which communication channels actually have best impacts and what impacts our campaigns are having should quickly reveal where we are having low impacts and where we can make significant efficiencies in the future. And I do think the report in terms of timescales is one of your earlier questions.
Why don't we know this, James? I mean, even if you're looking at this current regime, look at the current team, why don't we know what the reach is of our particular comms on different platforms? I mean, as somebody who uses social media myself, I know what my reach is on Nextdoor, I know what my reach is on Facebook. So surely as an organisation, that knowledge should be something that should have been with the comms team a long time ago. What do we know about our comms then? Yeah,
in terms of data, I think it's a fair assessment to say that the service hasn't made the most of the data that's available to it. And I would, the kind of data that we do hold primarily is data and insight that relates to the sort of, for example, the rate at which our digital communications are opened and engaged with by residents. We can track that digitally. And there's estimations of the sort of outreach and readership of other channels like the New and Mag, for example. I'd set that against, and you'll see this in the report.
Breaking up a bit, James.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now, or am I still breaking up?
You're breaking up.
Oh, apologies. Not sure if I can resolve that immediately. I can try to dial in on my phone quickly, if that's helpful.
Well, I mean, I'd quite like to move us on if people. Okay. Terry, you wanted to come in for supplementary just before we go to Councillor Mercer.
Sorry, a quick supplementary on this. In the papers, it says we spend approximately 2.12 million. Estimate we spend a minimum of about 180,000 on consultancy spend. Bearing in mind the conversation on budgets, do you see that being reduced in the forthcoming budget going forward, especially the consultancy spend?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it much clearer? I can't sort of predetermine the outcome of the internal conversations and the kind of public decisions that will be made on budget allocation. But what I would say is, as with all departments at the moment, savings options are being considered across all services, and similarly they are being considered in this area, and we would be looking at opportunities to reduce third-party spend as part of that process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just really quickly before I go to Councillor Mercer, I'm very, very conscious that you've been waiting very patiently, but just picking up on Terry's question, one thing that struck me reading the papers, as somebody who comes from a comms background, why do we need an ongoing branding team? Surely with branding, that is one case where you do hire a consultant, they do the job, they come in, they do the brand, and then that brand, once that brand is understood by the comms team, they move on. But we seem to have an 11-strong branding team. Why has that been felt necessary?
Yeah, just a direct quick reply on that. I can comment on the sort of current position of that service, particularly the decisions made to establish a team and the establishment of the brand reset programme and its priorities going forward. Particularly, I think the focus for that brand project moving forward is to deliver the brands in much more public facing arenas in ways that have a direct impact on resident take up. And just to quote some examples, how that has implications for the way the council designs delivery on its kind of major fleet, for example, or designs kind of public realm signage or otherwise. And that programme will take further time than you would expect it to, given the sort of procurement and commissioning timelines that is involved in. But the other thing I would say is, I think the Chief Marketing Officer once appointed in March, will no doubt want to review the operating model and the balance of resources between the current teams within the communications function. And I think the question that you've raised is a very legitimate one that I would fully expect that particular individual to pay quite a substantial amount of attention to. Given my sort of temporary oversight of the role, I don't think I can comment with too much confidence about the long term for that function if that's a reasonable response, but that's currently my position on it.
Okay, so that's something that your team might be looking at going forward. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. In absence of political leadership, my question was meant to be asked from the political leadership. Basically, I mean, we have got a YouTube channel broadcast live, and should we have people can comment and ask questions live on the, because I think it should have to be a two-way kind of a communication, people should be able to ask a question on that. I don't know if James will be able to answer that question. Are we going to be looking into that, or why, if not, how can we say we are,
I think that's a really fair question from Councillor Mercer. James, are there any thought have a two-way channel? Because I know in terms of scrutiny, it's been talked about before about members of scrutiny sometimes receiving questions over social media while we're live in session, and whether that's legitimate or not. Are there plans to actually enable that going forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to offer an immediate response. I think it's certainly something which I know corporately the organisation would be really keen to explore. Particularly, we'd be keen to look at what the best performing local authorities in the sector do, particularly to engage residents directly in public forums like this digitally. And it may be that that's easily facilitated through enabling chat on functions like Zoom, or perhaps through other digital channels that can be more moderated, just to ensure that there's no abuse of the sort of public kind of chat function, which is sometimes a risk with opening those channels up without some moderation. I know there are other tools which are used by other organisations which can enable that two-way communication. In short, though, I think it's absolutely something I know corporately and the comms team would be very, very keen to explore. And if there were any examples of that working, we'd be very keen to hear about those as part of our research. So yes, in short.
Okay, so we might want to make that a recommendation at the end of this session. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
Yeah, well, I've noticed there's so many different councils' websites. They have a chart service, when pop-up chart service when people, resident wanted to have it takes a very long time to answer the phone in Newham Council. So it won't be easier if we have a chart service available. So it's easier for a resident to communicate with the council.
But you're talking more generally in terms of comms with service?
Yes, service on the Newham website, yeah.
Yeah, the customer service centre. Okay, I think that's a really good suggestion.
I'm also happy to confirm on, sorry, Chair.
Sorry?
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to go to a second.
Yeah.
Councillor Paul, and then I'm going to bring in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. James, I've got I want to open with a comment. I used to work in the bank marketing department many years ago, and I think from recollection, Newham's marketing department is bigger than the bank I actually worked at. And also, reading the papers, I didn't feel where was the resident. I couldn't see where was the resident. I saw lots of nice new rebranding pictures, but I failed to see the resident. So my question is, in 2021, only 13% of residents felt that the council informed them adequately. That's from your papers supplied. But I note the new strategy came in 2022 and it goes on to 2026. So my question is, where is the baseline for finding out where the resident feels about this new strategy? Because I note that you wanted to see more. I note somewhere it says we need to find more evidence of a more effective comm strategy. And you put 3 criteria: improved engagement, outcomes, and value for money. In the paper, I can't see how the resident feels about that and how the resident feels they're being communicated to. So in the final comment, I just feel that we spent a lot of time talking about ourselves and less time really providing the resident with the communication channel they need. Can you just give me a comment on whether I've got that correct or have I not read the papers correctly?
You've accurately quoted the current evidence around resident perception, and the report doesn't elaborate much, I would agree, in terms of the current evidence and insight the council has in relation to what residents feel around their levels of engagement. What I would say in terms of that continued measurement of that baseline, the question that you particularly picked out there in the report, which relates to how residents feel around how well informed they are of what the council is doing, is absolutely a core question in our resident survey. And the findings of that survey are due to come to Cabinet in the new year. And we'd be very keen to kind of see whether or not that 2022 strategy, the brand reset, and other interventions that are listed in the paper have actually had a meaningful impact on what residents say in terms of how they feel informed and engaged. The other thing I would say is the report itself notes that the evaluation dashboard, which is a really important enabler for understanding the impact of what is a substantial amount of council spend, that is due to be implemented also early in the new year. And bringing those two pieces of really critical insight and data together should start to bring the resident voice and the resident perception much more to the forefront of the future planning and kind of programme of work for the communications function going forward. And no doubt the new Chief Marketing Officer will be needing that to kind of make the important changes they'll want to make in terms of the capability of the function.
Okay, quick supplementary.
Yeah, and a quick one. Just to go back on branding. Branding is about promise to the consumer. And obviously communication is a two-way thing. As already been alluded by Councillor Mirza, it is difficult to communicate with the council. And I note quite recently, James, you appeared at the Housing and Resident Scrutiny where how can I put it? There wasn't a good it wasn't particularly good how we communicate with residents via our phone system. So when we talk about communication, just a comment, can we not just see it as a us to residents and don't we look good, everyone's smiley and everyone's got gleaming teeth, but can we actually take the resident perspective and say, well, how does the resident communicate back to the organisation? I think it's a comment, what assurance can you provide that residents going forward will have a better experience at communicating with the council rather than seeing glossy branding pictures? I do think that is an important element we miss in our communication strategy, James.
In terms of the importance of that two-way communication, I don't disagree at all with the important connection that needs to be drawn between those two aspects of the council's business. If residents feel like the communication is only one way and when it's the other way, it's poor quality, or if it's not timely, or if the experience isn't good, it absolutely and fundamentally undermines the council's ambition to build trust and confidence through communications. I would just highlight the latest report to the Housing and Resident Experience Commission, which did highlight helpfully some quite substantial improvements that have been made in the timeliness of phone handling. The next stage of that programme is very much going to alight, as you rightfully point out, on improving the quality of interaction and not only the timeliness at which calls are picked up. We're now really seeing a substantial improvement in timeliness. We really want to make sure that residents, when they contact us, feel like the council is listening and that actually there's a real opportunity to kind of inform the council of how things are working and to ensure that that feedback is actually resulting in change. And that's very much a feature of that programme. And that programme and what's happening in the communications department, if they're both not working well in synergy, the overall impact is completely lost. So fundamentally, I agree with the point you're making. I think we're just on that trajectory as we kind of move into that improvement on quality in the new year.
Thank you, James.
Councillor Shaw.
Councillor Terry Paul asked pretty much the question I wanted to ask, but I'm going to slightly change my question now. So councillors play a vital role in bridging the gap between government and effective communications ensures residents are informed about community developments, policies and decisions that impact their daily lives. So for instance, yesterday, in East Ham, there was a day of action. All the departments of council came together and they've done an amazing job. Now, I mean, we've got residents sitting on the public gallery. It's about carrying that message to the residents. What have we achieved through that, and what are the outcomes, and how will we develop their expectations and to make their life outcomes better? So again, it comes back to what Paul said, where how do we communicate better? So the newer MAG goes, I believe, quarterly to the residents. So there's a pause of 3 months again to take a message back. Have we thought of any other ways of communicating with them? And the other way around is, again, if I give you an example, the Central Park, there's a new group called Friends of Central Park, and they've done some amazing work. How will the other residents know or find out the work they're doing? So is there a news desk that they can get in touch with? Pretty much what Paul asked, but a bit different.
Yeah, very pertinent questions, Councillor. So just on that first one about demonstrating the impacts of engagement, I think that's really important. And engagement for engagement's sake, we all know where that leads. The council, I think, is genuinely trying its best to make engagement meaningful. That day of action in East Ham is one of the examples. People Power Places programme, I'd say, is another one which residents sort of feel, and they report they feel, and actually we've got some really good insight and data around this, that is a programme that meaningfully can change it and deliver better outcomes in their local area, meaningfully divert those kind of community budgets towards important community projects. Just to kind of cite some of the kind of key improvements, which I think will start to demonstrate that impact on that kind of day of action and the work that's been happening around cleaning up the borough, for example, and thinking about the kind of approach to fly tipping. We're now moving into really positive territory around the total number of fly tips that are being reported. We're actually at 43% reduction based on the year before of numbers of fly tips reported. What we need to show to residents, for example, is that the engagement that they're having with us is directly influencing those sorts of outcomes, and it's not just engagement for engagement's sake. And I just fundamentally agree with your point. I think there's other proof points which the council must take advantage of and must develop that relationship with residents based on trust and insight and data like that. And on the point about the sort of opportunities to better understand what sorts of groups exist locally, advertise your local group that can, really provide other opportunities for your resident, your fellow neighbours or members of your community to participate in. The resident engagement service is a really good service to kind of land those opportunities. And for each neighbourhood, there's a neighbourhood coordinator. There's details on the website about how to get in touch with that individual. And that person is a really good repository and kind of newsletter and notice board through the community newsletters, kind of inform that. Perhaps we haven't done enough to kind of make that resource very visible to residents. And in fact, I'm happy to take that away as a kind of clear opportunity to improve the practice in that team to make sure that those resources are absolutely at the forefront of those groups' minds and visibility going forward.
If I can just pick up on 2 points that Councillor Shah made in particular, and one that came through when we were having the planning meeting for tonight's overview. One thing that Councillor Paul suggested was the idea of actually having a good news stories desk, because it goes, we were saying, almost goes wider than what the council's doing. It is good news stories about Newham, because too often in the news, Newham will feature because there's been some awful stabbing or poor housing quality. But there are lots of great news stories that happen in Newham. We know fantastic people live here. People do fantastic things here. And these need to be sort of shouted about as well. So we're thinking about whether it would be worth, in a more general sense, having a kind of good news desk where we kind of collate good things that are happening in our borough. I think that was the main point I wanted to make, apart from the role of local councillors as a way of sort of cascading news kind of out of the council down to residents and ensuring that residents are aware of the good things councils are doing, because it's really frustrating for us as councillors when we come across things that are happening, like, say, the work the public health team's doing, where that's not going out, and yet you'll see a lot of posters given over to the big vote in people-powered places. You know, it just feels sometimes that there needs to be a little bit more balance. I've got an important question though, myself, and that's around the sign-off process for news stories. Where does the buck stop in terms of putting out a press release or launching a campaign, given that according to your own documents, we haven't had anybody in that central marketing management role since August, if I've understood correctly? So what is the sign-off process?
Yeah, very happy to kind of give you my hopefully coherent understanding of that process, given the time I've had overseeing the function. But they're primarily, in terms of the kind of corporate communications team, there's primarily one sort of route which is used for development of communications campaigns or press releases. They're developed in partnership with relevant directorates and service areas, picking public health as one example. The director of public health or one of the public health consultants may highlight that there's an important need to flag a particular program of work in the Well Newham service, for example, or the Welcome to Newham service, or the smoking cessation service, for example, which the council will need to absolutely prioritise. The communications lead will develop the content or the plan around that. It will then be signed off by the relevant corporate director and then implemented. Where there is a need for kind of political oversight of a particular decision, that usually happens when it comes to cabinet decisions or decisions that have obviously a clear link to sort of political and policy making. That is where the mayor's office and the relevant cabinet member becomes a part of the sign-off process, and that will work through respective cabinet members where necessary. And then once that is signed off, the comms team will issue to the various different platforms, depending on the nature of the press activity or communications activity that's required. So I hope that's clear in broad terms about how the process.
So what you're saying is, if a director or a cabinet lead comes to you and wants a story to be put out, it will be put out?
Sorry, I should have clarified. So obviously not all requests are accepted. Sometimes, there is a need, and there is often a need, and this is what the Assistant Director of Communications and External Engagement leads. There is a need to balance kind of what is a reasonable amount of activity to kind of put out in a given week, given month. And there's always a checking in alignment with corporate priorities and campaign priorities.
So who's that role then? Where does the buck stop?
So in terms of kind of yes/no decisions on that check, that sits with the Assistant Director of External Affairs. Okay.
I'm going to bring Paul Leslie in because he hasn't said anything yet, and then I'm going to have to start rounding the item up, but I'll come to Councillor Charder for a last comment.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. James, just very quickly, from a voluntary community and faith sector perspective, what mapping is done to ensure that, in relation to the Newham MAG in particular, that the level of reach meets those marginalised communities who don't necessarily use all of the statutory sector buildings? And if once you've answered that, I'd really like to know then, how do you effectively measure that the MAG and therefore the council's comms is getting out there to all the communities in the Borough of Newham? Thanks.
Thanks. That's a really pertinent question as well. So in terms of the actual mechanisms for ensuring the MAG is received across the broadest possible range of communities, residents and neighbourhoods, the broad principle is that the Newham MAG goes to all known households in the borough. Now, we know, and we receive feedback regularly, that isn't always the case. There are certain new blocks that are established, for example, where they've not been added in a timely way to the kind of mailing list. And there are countless other exceptions which the team are aware of. So that universal coverage principle isn't one that we kind of guarantee is occurring on a quarterly basis. And no doubt, as councillors, you will have received your own kind of evidence of that. In terms of the actual monitoring of the kind of take up and readership and the diversity, the kind of breadth of that readership, it's rather challenging to kind of get really reliable data on that, because it's an analog paper. That just basically means it's paper based, it's not digital. What we rely upon is other channels, digital channels and others, to kind of ask residents the question of how they've contacted us, how they've received information about key issues. And we don't do this enough, we sometimes use dedicated links in the mag, which when clicked on by a resident, it tells us that the resident has actually contacted us as a result of reading the Newham mag. It's a unique link that is put into the mag for that particular issue. Now, that isn't done universally enough. It's not a common enough practice for us to say reliably that we can say we know exactly what that breadth of outreach is and how much of the mag is actually being read by residents. And unfortunately, I'm sure Maxine and Ashley, if they were here, they'd be able to give much more reliable data than I can, but I know that that's the current limit to what we know. And then in terms of the sort of overall measurability of the impact of the Newham mag, we do face some limitations based on the current data and the approach to kind of advertising the mag itself, to know with absolute confidence how many residents are reading it, what sort of background they're coming from, whether it's meeting their expectations, whether it's filling their information needs going forward. And it is actually, I completely acknowledge it's a gap that needs to be addressed in the future approach to evaluation, and some of those tactics I mentioned will be part of the plan to pick that up.
Chair,
Okay, I'm going to allow. Sorry, Paul, did you want to come back very quickly?
Just very, very briefly, I would
Yeah.
say though that, Chair, that with the amount of money being allocated to the strategy, one would have thought that in terms of having clarity around what good looks like and in measuring the level of readership take-up, that should have been a priority at the front end. And I hope that is going to be addressed going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Charder, very quickly, and then I'm going to round up on this item.
I'll leave this as perhaps we can have a written response to this. The one aspect we haven't talked about in the paper is the external public affairs team. Am I right in thinking that that team mirrors the comms team, the branding team, and that they work directorate by directorate? If that's the case, could we have sight of an example of a public affairs wing in each of the directorates for where there's a responsible officer? Because I'd like to understand exactly what value that team is bringing, because again, it's an extremely expensive team, and whether consideration is being given to a merger of teams or rationalisation of resources. But I'll leave that for a written response.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide a
Okay,
written
Councillor Mercer, what I'm going to do is take your question outside of the meeting.
Find out how many rebranded we had since May 2018, and how much it cost to change the rebrand every time and to the local council here.
Okay, I'll take a written answer on that one, and it will be minuted, so it will be available online, it will be available in the minutes for the next meeting, and it can be commented on then, but a very, very pertinent question.
Chair,
So
please may I just clarify Councillor Charder's request again, just to be clear?
Yes. Could you?
So could we get an example of each of the directorates and the external public affairs team? Each directorate has an external public affairs link of work. Could we get an example of a piece of work that they produced? That's the first one. And the second point is, has there been any consideration given to the rationalisation of the external public affairs team and the comms team?
So to bring this item to a close, I think we've got a lot of recommendations going forward. We'd like to see a part of the comms team devoted to actually promoting good news stories about the borough. We'd like to see better communication with residents and better input from residents to forums like Scrutiny. We'd like to look at actually having a chat function for residents who are approaching the council online. We're concerned about the lack of data we have, which seems quite shocking, both about the success of council messages on different channels, but equally about whether we're reaching all our communities, which is particularly important in a borough like Newham, as we learnt over the course of the pandemic. So I kind of feel that the person who will be starting with us in March in our new chief marketing role is going to have a lot of work in their in tray when they come and join us. But we look forward to that happening as an overview and scrutiny committee as well, continuing to monitor the performance of this function. But I'd like to thank you, James, for coming tonight, because I know you weren't feeling terrifically well. So we do really appreciate you
No problem.
joining us.
Thank
So
you.
I'd now like to bring this item to a close and ask that Newham Council's communication strategy, including Newham Council branding, delivery of the brand and its vehicles for communication with residents, be noted. And also, James, you know, as a result of this item, are there any particular actions that you will be taking back?
I certainly found the session itself very, very useful, and the particular recommendations about how we can open up two-way communications in relation to kind of cabinet and other committees, joining up some of the deliberate work around resident experience and this particular programme, and opportunities to look at, obviously, as we all are, integration and efficiencies. They're all actions that I'll be taking away actively to take forward into the next quarter. Obviously, as I see the actions and recommendations come out, I'll make sure that those are all, if there are any of those that can be implemented, subject to kind of internal conversations, we'll be pushing forward. But thank you for a productive and helpful conversation from my perspective.
Thank you, James. So moving on, we've now reached item 6 on our agenda, which is corporate governance risk management. Now, the purpose of this item is to consider the arrangements for corporate and directorate risks and risk management. This is a really important item. An effective council risk register should be a dynamic process that ensures that failing projects are recognised and terminated, and emerging issues or vulnerabilities that could come at a hefty cost are identified and mitigated when they hit thresholds of risk that have been agreed in advance, with these thresholds themselves being open to adjustments. Again, in response to the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny report, I'd like it noted for the minutes that the portfolio lead, which is again, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Mayor of Newham has not attended tonight.
No, it's actually me, Chair, for that area.
Yes.
Sorry.
But you're attending as a proxy, aren't you, Councillor?
No, not for this item. This item falls within my portfolio.
Okay, so you are the portfolio lead.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologise for that confusion.
Okay.
That should have been correctly reported to me.
It says on the report, actually, on the title of the report, it says clearly there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd also like to welcome again Conrad Hall, Corporate Director of Resources, and Nicola Wood, Newham Council's Chief Internal Auditor. We're really glad you could join us this evening on the Zoom. As with the previous item, I'd really like to limit opening remarks, as I feel the committee's been furnished with a good amount of information. The agenda for this meeting reveals not only what considerations should inform a council risk register, but includes our actual risk register as it stands. However, I'll allow a brief introduction from Conrad Hall. Actually, if we have opening remarks from Councillor Ali, I'm really sorry, as I say, I didn't realise that you were the portfolio lead. So if we can have some very brief remarks, and then some brief remarks from Councillor Hall, and then a quick response from Nicola Wood before we go to questions from members. That would be fantastic. Councillor Ali.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chair. And I think you very kindly summed it up for me in terms of your introduction. But basically, this is a very, very important area of governance in terms of risk management. A lot's happening in terms of the policy changes, the legislation changes, and the financial issues. So therefore, to have a risk register which is robust, which is dynamic, as you said, and is reviewed on a regular basis is something absolutely very important, as well as, us reviewing our risk appetite, depending upon which projects there are and how we're going to move forward. So this is quite critical, and I'm really grateful that you've chosen to look into this, because, you've made very interesting comments and contribution in the earlier report that we had. And, I really appreciate those, and certainly those are a number of things that you mentioned already as part of the first report are being looked at, and this is critical in terms of risk management as well. And just to add that the CMT, corporate management team is also actively looking at reviewing this to make sure that we do have a proper and more effective and efficient system for identifying the different types of risks and how we're going to mitigate that. And there is a report expected to be back to CMT in February, and hopefully we can then take it to Cabinet, which will indicate how we can better manage those. But this is a critical area. I won't say any more, but I'm pleased that Fiona Marsh is here as well. Fiona is the chair of the Audit Committee, And this is, this is an area that the audit committee does have a very close eye on, and I'm grateful for her attendance here tonight as well. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Okay, Conrad?
Really quickly from me, Chair. So as you say, you've got all the documents. I won't bother to walk you through them. I think for me, there's a couple of really valuable things that could come out of this discussion. So one, do we have Fiona Marsh, the independent chair of the audit committee here? I think it would be very helpful to discuss and hopefully agree where the audit role starts and stops and where the scrutiny role starts and stops, so that there's clarity on that going forward. As Councillor Ali highlights, we want to think about our approach to risk, and I think you really want to hear from Nicola Wood, who's a very experienced risk manager with a lot of private sector background and a very interesting perspective, I think, to bring to that. I was just going to give one example, and I do this almost deliberately to be slightly controversial, perhaps. So in Appendix 3, which is the list of the actual current corporate risk register, see a number of risks set out there. Just choosing one of them, number 7, which refers to the risk of inadequate safeguarding within children's services. Now, any local authority with children's services responsibility will have something like that on its risk register. And I suppose my query and test actually is, in the spirit of open discussion, just how valuable that actually is, because essentially what we're trying to do there is, in a few lines, try to capture the entire practice of the CYP department. And one wonders whether all of the processes that lead to risks going up to onto the corporate risk register really, they follow a standard model. Other local authorities will be adopting this, but I think it'd be really helpful to get views on actually kind of risks you want to see on the corporate risk register, because some of them are just, by the nature of the authority we are, so big and so broad that you may not, or I think it's reasonable to query whether it's appropriate to cascade risks up to the corporate risk register in that way, when they're covering such a big subject. So I think it's a really apt time to have a wider discussion about how this system wants to work. I do think you would want to hear from Nicola, who, as I say, has a tremendous amount of experience in this area. So I'll pause there, Chair, if I may.
Okay, Nicola, do you have some opening remarks and possibly some insights on what the ideal relationship between scrutiny and audit should be in terms of the risk register, before I open the floor to questions from the committee?
I think in the interest of time, I'll take the report as read and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any opinions you want to share for the committee, though, before we open?
I'm more happy to answer questions, so I can target them more towards the questions that are asked.
Okay, Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for both Councillor Ali and Conrad. Councillor Ali, in your opening remarks, you said this is a very important thing, the risk register, and it's very important to review it. How often do you review the corporate risk register, and what does that look like?
Well, the officers clearly review this on a regular basis, and this is something that goes to audit board, audit committee, as you're well aware, because you're a member of the audit committee. And in terms of frequency, I'm not absolutely clear, but I would have thought, I'm sure Nicola can provide you a better response on that. But I would have thought this is an ongoing review, depending upon how each of the risks is moving forward. So I wouldn't say there is going to be, say, like quarterly or 6-monthly review, because I would rather see that each risk, particularly the high risk in Appendix 3, are reviewed as we're going along. Because clearly things do change in terms of risk levels and mitigations, etc. Because there are so many external factors which may affect each of the risks. Therefore, it's a continuous process, in my view.
Councillor Paul, did you want to come back on that?
Conrad, before.
Same question.
Yeah.
So we review the risk register quarterly at the corporate management team, and is reported on to the audit committee from there. Obviously, that's the corporate review of the overall risk register, so clearly that doesn't mean that no one is thinking about these risks at any other time.
Yeah.
Formally, that's the review date.
The reason why I asked that, because in the report which Nicola wrote, there's something about who checks the checker, right? And a note, because of the work at the audit board, it came up, but all right, let's go back. On the National Risk Register, cyber attack by foreign state actors is one of the live risks to this country. And therefore IT is a really serious issue. I note in the risk register, technology risks, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 were updated on the 16th of January. There was no update at the CMT in July of this year, and no update in October. So effectively, we had no, let's call it assurance or oversight, but these, with no evidence, but these checks, these risks were being managed by the corporate team. So therefore, and it's, how does audit stroke overview get assurance that these risks are being challenged and checked? Where do we get that assurance? Because from the document, nothing had happened for nearly 9 months on a very important aspect of the council's risk.
Yeah, and Nicola will come in. I mean, clearly, as has been discussed previously at the audit committee, there was, a gap. No one's seeking to excuse that in terms of updating of the corporate risk register. I don't want to give, therefore, the impression that nothing was happening in respect of these things, but you're quite right. One of the purposes of it is actually to gain that extra level of assurance, and
and just
didn't happen at that period through oversight, but it doesn't excuse it.
What additional controls, checks, or processes could be put in place to help the organisation manage, the everyday? What is it we should be doing, but we're not doing at the moment, which could help everyone manage the risk?
So, I think we should probably bring Nicola in at that point. Her report highlights, the more normal private sector practice of employing dedicated risk managers who would do that. Clearly, again, you have to be careful then to balance the cost of that with the benefit. And, if one takes the advantage, example, for instance, of a bank where all of the risks will be of a somewhat similar sort of nature, you can see how that function might work. It might be rather more difficult to make that work in a local authority without significant cost, where you're balancing so many different sorts of risks. So I think that there's a real kind of issue to decide there about how much you invest in that checking function against the return you expect to get from it. But perhaps I could bring Nicola in on that point.
Can I just jump in actually with a slight supplementary to what Councillor Paul was asking before we go to Nicola Wood? On page 57 of my agenda, it actually says that our cybersecurity appropriate technical controls, that a plan is underway to remedy this, but in the risk register, there are no timelines for review or any idea of success, what success would look like. And again, when it comes to information security, there's talk of a shift to a cloud, but that's not going to happen till next year. And what's interesting is earlier in the report, we've got an idea of what an ideal risk register should look like, where you've got the cost of the different risks. So you have a really clear idea of what the thresholds are and what the penalties are. And, in terms of an information lapse, Councillor Booker in the planning meeting was saying, that could cost us 17 million. So that's a huge level of risk, but it's not clear in our risk register. And I'm just wondering that that's an obvious flaw at the moment that should be remedied.
I don't think it is, no. You have to remember that the corporate risk register, we've acknowledged and moved on from the point about the failure to update it for a period. But your corporate risk register isn't there to capture everything that is being happening. It needs to be a reasonably succinct document to give at the most senior level an idea of the significant risks that are being managed, of some of the issues attached with them and who is responsible and so on. It's not that any of the information you suggested is not relevant, of course it is, but I think I would question whether you want to put more and more information into the corporate risk register, as opposed to being confident that that information exists as it does further down the organisation and is being managed there appropriately. The purpose of the corporate risk register for me is not to sort of then replicate the management of each individual risk, as to gain overall assurance that the risk collectively have appropriate owners and actions in place.
If you've got no action plan for addressing that
I didn't say we had no action.
timeline.
I said I didn't think it was appropriate to include that within the corporate risk register, because if I did that for each of the risks in here, you would then have an extremely lengthy document that wouldn't give you that corporate overview, which is what the corporate risk register is for. So we're not arguing at all. There's no debate whatsoever. The information you say, you know, is absolutely important. It does exist. I'm just saying that I don't think it would be sensible to include that in the corporate risk register because it would be an excessive level of detail.
Councillor Paul, do you want to come back in quickly before I go?
Just quickly.
Good.
When you gave us that contentious challenge at the beginning of your segment, I wrote down, it is the process that you're monitoring it, right? That's the only thing we've got. So it's less say the quality of the inclusion. It's the tick box, but a manager said, yeah, I've got that risk. It's on my watch. I've got it sorted. And at the moment, I go back to the cyber one. By looking at that piece of paper, it looked like there was no one, forget the quality of what's included. It looked like no one was owning the risk. So I'm not arguing, Conrad, over the quality of the document, should it be whatever. And I absolutely agree with you. Effectively, for me, it could be a checklist. Yes, I've got the risk and I own it. For me, that's good enough. Because then I would know that manager has gone away and he's managing that risk. What we've got at the moment, we had no assurance that anything has been done. So I go back and I shut up and let through the chair, let Nicola come in. But who checks the checker is the thing we need assurance on. And once we get that answer, then the other answer is, and you're right, because Fiona's here, and you're absolutely right, corporately, where's the dividing line between the audit committee and overview? And I think us doing it together is a sign that the organisation, from a member's side, is wanting assurance, and we don't quite know how we get there.
And I've noted Councillor Ali's hand. Do you want to come in before I go to?
It was very briefly, Chair. I mean, clearly the points you're making are quite helpful one. But just to go back on the cybersecurity one, if you look at page 57, the action plan, there's an update on November 23, which clearly states that a plan has been constructed with our cybersecurity partners, and critical and high vulnerabilities identified and action plans are being produced. I mean, that work is ongoing, and this is a serious and high priority, as you've all said, and I think that's well acknowledged. And clearly, it is being looked at, and the chief digital officer is the owner of that. But obviously, we do need. I mean, I think the point about it, who checks the checker, is something that's procedural, and as I said earlier, CMT is reviewing it, and possibly this could be part of the process by the time the February report comes out.
Zulfikar, if I can come in?
Yeah, sure.
That update was only done because of the audit committee. If the audit committee had not flagged it, I suspect that update would not have been done, right? So
yeah,
you can't claim credit there, actually. I think Fiona and Fiona Marsh, who's here, and the audit committee should be claiming the credit on that one.
I clearly that is the role of audit committee, and I really appreciate and I welcome that. And I think, you know, anything that to improve the process and system is something that we welcome. And certainly, I mean, from officer perspective and members' interaction at my level, this cybersecurity is being a part of the discussion we have. And you know, clearly the split between one source and Havering and us, you know, this is part of the discussion we're having altogether. But the way it's been presented, you know, you obviously have a point that when it went to audit committee, this wasn't probably there, and I'm not surprised because I had similar concern with respect to some other reports that went to audit board, and that's something I'm looking at very closely based on what went to the audit committee previously in terms of various updates on audit reports, which is a separate issue, but I'm also looking at that. Thank you.
Okay, can I bring in Nicola Wood at this point to comment on what she's heard so far?
Thank you, Chair. In theory, what should happen is the risks are managed by the directorates, that they are then reported upwards to the CMT, and in theory should be discussed at the CMT on a quarterly basis before then a full risk register is presented to the audit committee. every quarter, the audit committee should, in theory, be able to challenge the relevant risk owners on progress. But as the audit committee knows, that hasn't happened.
Why has that not happened? Is that because the risk register itself hasn't been up to date, or the risk holders haven't attended audit?
So for the July audit committee, the risk register was not up to date, and I was not able to present it to the CMT, so the CMT didn't discuss it in July. In October, the risk register was not up to date. I hadn't received updates, and it wasn't discussed at the CMT. It was presented, but the CMT were requested updates to go to the audit committee. The audit committee, again, the risk register still contained blanks, and the relevant officers were not there to discuss it, which is then why after the audit committee, the 4 risks relating to ICT and the 2 risks relating to children's, which hadn't been updated since January, were then updated.
Actually, you have to ask yourself as a committee. I'll come back to my example on children's services, and this is, what use are we wanting to make of a corporate risk register? Because you're trying in a sort of few lines on a table there to capture essentially the entire work of a department, or a very substantial amount of the work of the department there. And so, for me, this is a common experience of many local authorities that I've worked with, because some of the risks in the corporate risk register are so broad. It's difficult to provide meaningful updates. That doesn't excuse that it didn't happen. I mean, it should have happened and it didn't. But I don't think you can draw from that the conclusion that therefore the children's department was sort of, not watching and not carrying out appropriate safeguarding arrangements. And that all comes back to, well, what actually do we want on the corporate risk register? Because if you're going to include these generic risks that don't have 1 or 2 specific actions that you do to manage them, they have 20, 50, 100, all of which you manage at a departmental level. What actually do you want to put on your corporate risk register? Because there's an element, as I say, I don't excuse it, but to an extent I can understand it. If someone feels that providing an update to that is effectively ticking a box because all the work has already been done elsewhere, then one can kind of understand the mentality that drives that. And I think that comes back to fundamentally, actually, should we be capturing a different sort of risk on the corporate risk register? One good way of measuring how good your risk register is to look at it 1 year to the next or 6 months to the next. If most of the risks are different, that means you have a dynamic risk register where you've had an issue, you've dealt with it, you've closed it out, and so on. In the local authority context, you will often find that a lot of those risks remain the same, quarter by quarter, month by month, year by year, and so on, precisely because they're pitched at that very general level. And I think it would be really helpful to actually get some thoughts on, well, what alternative approaches might there be that would provide more assurance. We can carry on doing this, and we can do the updates to the risk register better than we have been doing, clearly, no question. But I think there's a legitimate question as to whether that practice is really the most effective way to drive risk management in the organisation. Some risk for others on here, it's absolutely no question the right approach.
Councillor Charder.
Just to also declare, I am on the audit committee as well. I've got to say, I mean, I understand the spirit of what you're saying, Conrad, and I do have some sympathy with it. It's a lot of communication, and it could go on forever. I totally and utterly understand that. And in that spirit, I'd be interested to see what other local authorities do, if there's other models that we could look at. That's fair enough. However, there is a fundamental problem here around the culture of the risk register and how it is actually accepted or not accepted. And until we crack that, I don't want to deviate from this, because it's led to me. I'm involved with other organisations where the corporate risk register is as expansive as this, but there are other concerns about how it's socialised in the organisation. And this is a real concern as well. If this is all at directorate level and at senior management level, and maybe at cabinet level as well, how do we know that frontline staff are feeding in risk? I'm thinking about reputational risks, I'm thinking about caseworks, I'm thinking about litigation. we don't have a comprehensive enough system. I agree on that, right? We tend to, we've got in a fast changing environment where the external environment is changing, the financial environment is all changing at the same time. How can we as members be assured that what you're saying is happening? Because personally, I'm sorry to say, as a councillor, I don't have a level of trust here. I am not confident that things will get picked up as they do.
I mean, I think, given the history of the recent, failure to update the risk register, that's an understandable position. I think part of the answer to your question lies in the paper, which is about employing more dedicated risk managers, which would provide that further level of assurance. Obviously, as with all such decisions, you then just need to sort of balance the costs of that versus other services and so on. But I mean, no question, one of the ways to drive more of this is to employ more people in risk management functions. But obviously, then you have to balance the cost of it.
But aren't all of these risks very much about managing business as usual? So what is it that I don't think we do need separate layer of staff to actually manage risk. What we need to be is assured that those dedicated individuals who hold this risk are managing it correctly.
But I think that's the point. Your management chains will provide that to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how well they operate and so on. The point about dedicated risk managers is it provides a level of assurance outside of that management chain.
How would it provide assurance if that dedicated risk manager is reporting through the senior management team?
Well, everyone's going to report to someone at some point. I mean, you have to accept. Ultimately, everyone reports up to the chief executive. I think there's probably a degree of trust in all of this, but a risk manager would sit out of. You wouldn't employ a risk manager in the ICT department and a risk manager in the children's department and so on. You'd employ some risk managers sitting in some central function or whatever, check that in respect of each of the risks, the actions that are said to be undertaken are actually being undertaken and so on, and that would provide a degree of assurance. In much the same way, for example, as an internal audit function, when ultimately reports up into the chief executive, as everything does, but it doesn't mean you can't rely on them for objective and impartial advice outside of the management chain.
I'm sorry, I'll still come back to the point. It feels like an extra layer of bureaucracy when this should be stuff like singing.
Yeah.
That's precisely the point I'm making about the balance to be struck. I mean, in a perfect world, you wouldn't need risk registers because everyone is just thinking about risk all the time and weighing it up and making appropriate decisions to manage it and so on. You put systems like this in place to provide you with a level of assurance. The question then is how much you want to invest in extra people doing assurance as opposed to doing management.
If I can come back in as chair just briefly, I think one of the things that struck me reading the papers is there's a comment on page 47 about all members having a role in managing risk successfully. And that's my question at the moment. Where do we come in as members? Obviously, we've got the people here who sit on audit, and that's fantastic. But as somebody who's been a councillor for 9 years, this is completely new to me. I've been a scrutiny chair for years, and I've not been presented with the risk register before. This is new. And so to find out, speaking to members of audit, that the level of risk in some areas, if things go wrong, is 17 million, I think, was being spoken of in terms of, if there were an issue with information management. When you see it at that level, you realise how serious this stuff is. And so I would want that added to the risk register for a start, just for members to wake up to it, but also for us just to understand where the risks are so we can properly question. And it would inform scrutiny. It would inform scrutiny, in having, regular updates at meetings about levels of risk and action plans and timelines, the things that are kind of missing.
If I may, yes, it would inform scrutiny, but, my argument would be, well, you have an audit committee that wants to be informed of that. If everyone's focusing on this, then perhaps other things would lose focus. I can see other people want to come in. Just on that specific point, because it's been made about the level of fine that can be levied for GDPR breaches. It is true that that is based on the turnover of the organisation, and therefore, as set out in the legislation, could in theory result in a fine of up to £70 million for a breach. Having litigated cases like this at previous authorities, actually the court's taken an extremely sensible view of that. And I've seen serious breaches with fines, massively lower than that level. So I think just because the legislation says that there's a theoretical maximum, I think we ought not to fixate too much on that figure. There's plenty of established case law that sees the actual practice much lower than that. I just wanted to correct that.
And seeing that discrepancy within a risk register, so we understand where we're at and we feel more informed to make decisions about what we need to sort of be looking at in scrutiny in terms of the delivery. Because I can see the audit sort of looking more generally at risk, and then, scrutiny can then look at the quality of delivery in a particular area. Councillor Charder, did you want to come?
I've just
back to
say that I think part of the problem here goes back to our first topic, is communication. Communication in the organisation is not where it needs to be. I am that fearful of the level of risk that I actually had to ask the monitoring officer for advice on what the liabilities for us were around corporate manslaughter, because that's my level of concern about what is being said to us, what is being done. What I'd like to see is in 2024, we go forward with a level of reassurance, with clearer communications. And that's why I go back to the point, let's have a look at another template. If there's another system that's what works, let's have a look at that. But we just need to make sure that the work's getting done. And I'm not sure we know that.
Councillor Paul, I'm going to bring you in, and then I've noted Councillor Ali's hand, so I'll come to you afterwards.
Yeah, it's just to sort of build on what Conrad said, Chair. I'm looking at your risk, Conrad, right? And I get from what you've written what the financial risk is to the organisation. Okay. So 2 points really. It's about how it's written and how it's controlled. What I will say, Chair, we saw earlier within the last couple of months for Audit Board, the departmental risk registers, and they were quite appallingly written, right? And it made us think, do the departments own? Can they encapsulate their risk appropriately? And there's that link to the high level risk. And I think there's something there. And I think in terms of a recommendation, it might be, back to your point, but the chief executive once or twice a year, she and yourself could decide how, actually does an all members briefing on the risk registers to the council and just say what those are. And let the chief executive decide is to format the right thing. I think it links back to appraisals as well. What get measured gets done. I think earlier this year we had from the interim chief executive, I think it was something about 80% of staff didn't have an appraisal. I'm willing to be corrected on that figure. And it does seem to be there's a link between a lack of appraisal for managers, a lack of encapsulating the risk on a piece of paper, a lack of that departmental risk going to the top risk, and a lack of communication of the risk to councillors. So I think it perhaps, Chair, via you, if the chief executive finds a mechanism to talk to all members about corporate risk. Perhaps
I've noted that.
I do accept the challenge which Conrad gave, because it depends what you write on a piece of paper and are the words quite smart, and does it encapsulate the risk? But I do think the question is, how do we provide the level of assurance? For me, I'll be quite happy with a tick box. As long as the manager says, I own my risk in my department, that's good enough for me. If something goes wrong, we can go back to that manager and say, show me how you assured us. I'm happy with that. I think we treat managers respectfully, but I think it is about how the organisation develops its framework, I think.
I want to quickly go back to Councillor Ali, just to keep things balanced, and then I'll come to Nicola, and then you haven't spoken yet on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief, and I think Councillor Paul has made the point that I was going to make in terms of the performance management and making sure, the point that Fiona made earlier, that the directors and the managers need to own their risks, and that's the first starting point. And then from there onward, it goes to the departmental management team, then corporate management team. Then we, from the cabinet perspective, just to let you know that we will be bringing back the risk register and to quarterly, cabinet accountability models to make sure that there is a cabinet insight as well on that side. But the fundamental point is being part of the organizational culture, performance management, good management practices across the department, so that there is the ownership at the lowest level, and then that brings up the hierarchy to make sure that there is somebody obviously seeing what has been done, and then the role that Conrad said it for the internal audit as well. But certainly the reports that went to the previous last audit board did concern me, and that's the reason we are instituting additional sort of control and management in the process and review to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But your suggestions are quite valid, and we'll look into those. Thank you.
Okay, if I can bring in Nicola, and then I'll go to Councillor Shah.
Thank you, Chair. To your comment of how would the members get involved in risk management, my view is very much if a portfolio lead is talking to a director on area, they'd be talking about what is your budget, what are your KPIs, what is your performance, and for them not to then say, and what are the key risks that would prevent you from achieving those objectives, would be surprising. So I would assume that all portfolio leads would be talking about risks every time they meet with their counterfacing officers. So that would be the members. I'd be surprised if they're not doing that, because that's what, surely, if they're talking about performance objectives, what are the key risks that would prevent you from achieving that? What are the key risks that would prevent you achieving your budget? What are the key risks that would prevent you from achieving your key projects, key strategic initiatives? On the second point on the templates, we could have any template you wanted. If a template's blank, a template's blank. If a template isn't discussed at CMT, it's not discussed at CMT. We have a template that's very, very similar to other templates that are used in other boroughs. It is important that it is completed and it is discussed, because if it isn't discussed by portfolio leads, if it isn't discussed at the CMT, if it isn't discussed at the audit committee, it won't be completed. Thank you.
Does anyone want to come back on that before I go to Councillor Shah? Councillor Chadha?
I totally agree with the sentiments of it. And can I just draw on the example that when the contact centre went down, we were told by the portfolio lead for resident experience that she hadn't met with the accountable director for over 3 months. Now, that to me is something that impacts on us greatly. So it goes back to that point that if there's no clear lines of communication or accountability on this, it's not going to work.
Councillor Shah, on that bombshell from Councillor Chadha.
So this meeting, Councillor Terry Paul has been asking all the questions I want to ask. I'm going to put it down to listen. That we both were at the planning meeting, or is it that great minds think alike?
Yeah,
right?
very true.
Okay, so we've been talking about process, challenges, framework, performance management, many things. But for me, the short question is, what are the main high-level corporate risks facing this council at the moment?
Good question.
Well, those are the risks set out in Appendix 3. I'm afraid I don't have the page numbers for your pack, but that is the corporate risk register, which contains
page 57.
16. So those are the greatest risks facing the council.
Can I come back on that actually? Because one of the problems I had reading the papers, and I think it comes back to the organisation around pillars, possibly, is that we felt there were a number of risks that were being missed. In the earlier part of our papers, we had a breakdown of, a comprehensive list of the kind of risks that a local authority should be looking at, including things like commercial risk, fraud, and those seem to be lacking from our risk register. And I'm not saying this because I'm implying that I think for 1 minute that that might be the situation we're in, but that they're not on the risk register. It doesn't feel like they're being tracked.
So which risk would you like me to take off and to substitute that? Because I think
I don't see.
we could add more and more risks and not be able to manage.
I mean, these are
register effectively.
that are listed as forming part of a risk register. I mean, commercial risk, we know that has been a major factor in financial problems.
It is
in other
there, Chair.
authorities.
It is there as number 10. Commercial risk is in there, Chair, on page 62. That's
But
in there.
the more general point, you know, the vast range of activity we undertake, there's a significant number of risks, many of which are significant. That's the nature of our business. I strongly think that if anything, we have too many risks on the corporate risk register already. The more risks you add here, it doesn't necessarily mean that you make them better managed. It just says we have more and more things on the corporate risk register. As I say, there are arrangements underneath this that work well, badly, or indifferently in different departments to manage kind of lower level risks. My strong advice would be if you feel that is something that ought to have more prominence on the risk register, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think you should do that on the basis of saying, well, there's something else then that we'd like to take off. So otherwise, all you'll do is add more and more risk onto the risk register. You'll spend more time talking about those and the management of a growing risk register than about delivery of the business. The risk register has to be an effective way of ensuring you deliver your objectives. And with respect, I don't think making it longer achieves that.
Nicola, did you want to come back in, or is that an old hand?
No, I agree with Conrad. The corporate risk register should be the top risks that are on the CMT's mind, that they want to be talking about weekly, monthly, quarterly, and it should change so that in every quarter, some should drop off, some should stay on there. For example, the cyber risk has stayed on there because it is an ongoing risk, and you'd see that everywhere else. There are other risks that are just, I call it the risk of doing business, being in an organisation. It should just be the top, preferably 10 risks that the CMT is focused on, and the other risks are managed at a lower level. We've got 17, and as Conrad said, we don't want it to keep growing. We want it to be small and manageable so that it can be discussed at CMT, challenged at CMT, and it is a living, breathing document. It is not a comprehensive list of all the risks that we have. Those should be, in theory, at the lower levels throughout the directorates.
Does anyone want to come back on that from the committee? Any sort of opinions from anybody on? Councillor Charter.
I can understand the rationale of shortening it. The point is, and I think collectively we can agree, yes, to the top 10 as Nicola suggested. The point is, where is the reassurance that it is being actioned? That's the bit for me that's missing. If we get into a situation where there are blanks again, next time we look at the risk register, how are we to deal with that? So I'm thinking of it as horizontally, yes, we start trimming it down, but vertically, do we need it as a smart action plan that actually, not with the details of the actions that are to be taken, but that says where the accountability sits?
Yeah, I think going on to accountability will be really, really helpful. We've discussed some of the issues at officer level. It would be helpful to know your views on where the accountability sits between audit and scrutiny, because at the moment it feels that it's reporting into two places, which is usually a good way of ensuring that there isn't proper accountability.
To me, that feels really obvious in that audit highlights a level of risk, and then within the conversations we have as scrutiny chairs with all our stakeholders, we ensure that the pieces of work we're undertaking cover that level and how we're responding as a council in terms of delivery.
So the corporate risk register will continue to be reported to audit and not scrutiny, is that right?
Yeah, but then we would have a dynamic relationship with audit to check in and see if they're picking up on any risks that are new or increases in risks that we can then be mindful of in terms of setting our respective work programmes. That's what I'd suggest. Nicola, what would you say that's the way forward for the relationship between audit and scrutiny?
What I would like to see is the audit committee getting full complete risk registers and feeling assured that they are able to get the assurance that the action plans are in place and are moving. I don't think at the moment they're getting that assurance, although they can obviously speak for themselves on that. As for the interaction with scrutiny, I think it should just go to what I call an audit and risk committee, as you'd have in the private sector, just one committee that looks at both internal audit and risk management, but that they're able to challenge and get the assurance that they need over action plans in place for risks.
Okay, Councillor Ali, you've got your hand up.
Well, I was simply going to make the point that really we need to make sure that the audit committee gets the right information through right channels, and it is credible information that you should be getting at that level. And then if once you get that, and I'm sure there'll be a sufficient degree of assurance to satisfy you that you are getting information that you deserve and you need. And this is why I said earlier that we are looking at this to make sure that the information that goes to the audit committee is robust, is complete, and is not sort of empty columns or with no information. And that clearly does not give the audit committee any degree of assurance. So the accountability needs to be at the lowest level, which is at the director level, and then the organizations, the hierarchy, which CMT and chief executive is trying to resolve. And hopefully the February report, with the review, when that comes up, we can take some of the comments you made as part of the process as well to do that. In terms of the relationship, I think, I think it is actually the audit committee responsibility. How you pick up things from there in order to link in as part of the scrutiny role is something that perhaps we need to think about. But on the other hand, I don't think anything stops you to when you are actually scrutinizing different service areas. I don't think anything stops you to actually raise these risk issues as part of the scrutiny process there.
And just rolling you back slightly, can we get an assurance from you tonight, Councillor Ali, that the work will be undertaken so that when we get to our audit meeting in January, Nicola and Fiona will be presented with a comprehensive dynamic risk register? Can you guarantee that as portfolio lead?
I mean, before even your intervention, that's something that I have personally taken very seriously, because I was not pleased with what went to the last audit committee, and officers are fully aware of the need to make sure that we do proper due diligence and complete the risk assessments properly and before they go to audit committee. And that is why I said earlier that we're also bringing in another tier of oversight through the Cabinet Accountability Forum. And the other areas, you mentioned obviously reputation risk and other risk. I mean, if you look at
in January though, will the audit committee be able to sort of enjoy a comprehensive, complete risk register?
I'm not sure if is it due to go to January committee, January report? I don't know.
And the answer to your question, Chair, is
Sorry, the next audit committee is in February.
February, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, the February committee, you will, the paper that you will get will make sure that every risk element is completed and you are given a proper assessment of each and every risk rather than actually blanks in there. And that's assurance I can give you here.
Okay, fantastic.
The only other point I was trying to make is the risk categories in page 56. You've got 10 categories there. And some of the things that Rita was saying earlier in terms of reputation, other things, and then the financial risk, etc. I mean, we can incorporate some of those elements in there, because clearly beyond every risk management plan, there is an action plan the department has, which they're working on. Like Connor said, this is just an overview, but be assured that there are detailed working documents and action plans behind the scene, which ought to be utilized in order to give you the latest information when it goes to the audit committee next.
Okay, I'm very aware we haven't heard from Fiona Marsh, so I'd just like to see if Fiona wants to add anything before I bring Councillor Charter back in and then bring this item to a close.
We've got move standing orders, Chair.
Michael? Move standing orders, Michael, just to make sure we get through the business of the meeting. So I would like to extend the duration of the meeting and move that the meeting be extended for up to half an hour to conclude by 9:30. Although to be quite honest, I'm aiming to conclude. I'd still like to think we'll conclude by 9,
Yep.
but just to give us that assurance, we can get through all the business of the meeting. So.
No, so I'd just like to come in after Fiona has spoken.
Okay, fantastic. So do I have the approval of the committee?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So Fiona.
Hello, hi Chair. Yes, I agree with much of what has been said. It was disappointing that the risk register wasn't updated. I think, especially on the cyber stuff, the director didn't attend, and I think there has to be more concern about the importance of attending the audit committee if your paper is due, and especially on the risk register. I think that just needs to be disseminated back to CMT that it's not optional. You need to come and present and allow yourself to be challenged. And because the director didn't attend, we weren't able to do that. So I'm glad that between both committees, we've been able to bring to the fore more concern about risk management within the council. And I think Councillor Chadder was asking about how it's disseminated further within the organisation and about communication. I think that is key, because it's not just at CMT. Risk management is everybody's responsibility. All officers within the council have a responsibility. Some have more because of their position and some have less because of their position. But it's something that has to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. And I don't think that is communicated across, especially downwards from the senior management team. So within the organisation, there isn't the culture to be grasping risk management and thinking about it, because it's not the culture to do so, and that has to change. But that's a conversation for another day. What Conrad was saying about the number of risks and expanding, yes, Nicholas said it does need to be focused. So I don't think we need to expand it any further, because it is a high level document. So within the directorates, as has already been mentioned, the detail should be there. It's for the CMT to be ensuring that their officers below them are managing those risks and feeding back and forth and giving them the information to be able to have their assurance, to provide assurance to all the committees, especially the audit committee.
Conrad.
Just one comment on that, and then one question for the committee. I mean, there's no problem about having attendance of senior officers at meetings with notice. Just been going through as we've been speaking. There's somewhere like over a dozen officers named by job title or name on the risk register. They can't all just be on standby in case they're needed. So I think that one kind of goes both ways. Committees need to give appropriate notice that they want someone for a particular discussion, rather than and with decent notice when there's an item like this that's got a number of different people to be involved in it. The question I wanted to put back to the committee, given that we've hopefully moved on from the previous failure to update the risk register, is that now it's been updated. Are there any issues on there when members have concern about what's written there, or what should change?
Councillor Paul.
Can I have some more numbers, please, and some more timelines? I think with your one, Conrad, you have mentioned scale and scope of the nature of our financial challenge, but some of the other ones, like the children's one you mentioned, there's no numbers in it, there's no metrics, so it's very qualitative and not quantitative enough. So only a few, just a small tweak in areas. And what that will do, Conrad, I think it will lessen the amount of words officers will have to write if they put a few numbers in to give scale and scope. That's just a tonal thing for me.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah.
Paul Leslie, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Conrad, just in terms of the, again, the children's priority 6, it strikes me that the low appetite for risk actually is more costly when we look at implement strategies to implement engagement and reducing things like serious youth violence or gang activity in Newham. So I'm wondering how that dial moves, or if that dial moves, how you would then move to create a much more cohesive strategy around changing that low appetite for risk to a slightly different appetite for risk, which would then mean much more robust strategies to address those core issues that we're continually dealing with. So unless the document is used in that particular way, a live document, then it's a missed opportunity to address some of those key local issues that local residents are most concerned about.
I agree that the risk appetite is something that probably receives less focus and discussions like this than it should. Just to be clear, and apologies, Ms. Elizabeth, I may have misunderstood you, but I think, just in case I have, I think it's just important to clarify the point. By saying that there is a low appetite for risk there, that means that we don't want to tolerate, any level of risk and therefore intervene a lot. I think, there are legitimate questions as to, whether that is a realistic attitude to hold, for example, in terms of cost and so on. But I can contrast that with, say, in terms of housing, where the risk register says we'll have a much higher appetite for risk. We will take on schemes that are potentially risky because the alternative of allowing high numbers of people to remain in temporary accommodation, for example, may be more expensive. So the risk appetite, again, apologies, I may have misunderstood you, but it sounded a bit as though you were saying, that we should sort of interpret that the other way around. The low risk appetite there means we don't want to have any risks in that area. So there's a legitimate question as to whether that's realistic. But it was just some of your subsequent comments made me think that you were interpreting that the other way around, and so I just wanted to check the point.
And I can come back. So I was interpreting a low appetite for risk, meaning that the interventions were risk averse. So if I've got that the wrong way around, then I'm happy to get clarity.
Yeah.
But if we are then saying that in terms of our strategy and our approach to young people, that we are less risk averse and therefore prepared to take more risk, that implies more innovation and more creativity, which I would support.
And that may well be a sensible follow-up, and perhaps your Children's Scrutiny Committee may want to sort of have a broader, richer discussion on that. I mean, obviously it's not my own particular field, but I think there's a very legitimate question there as to, exactly as you say, whether we should be, tolerating a higher level of risk and adopting more innovative practice versus the obvious risks associated with that. It's not my field, but might be something the Children's Scrutiny Committee wanted to pick up in more detail.
Councillor Charter, very quickly before I...
Item 3, I note the update provided in November 2023, but we still haven't got a timeline on it. So back to Councillor Paul's point, reassuring to know there's work continuing, but the recommissioning a further discovery kind of suggests that there was problems with the first, whilst we don't need to know the details about that, knowing that we're on track to reassure it. And just one point to Councillor Ali, going back to Nicola's point around portfolio leads are discussing risk with their directors. And I don't want, and a simple yes or no in writing, maybe once you've discussed it with your colleagues, will survive, without reference to the Cabinet Accountability Forum, because I still don't understand what that is. The Cabinet members, can you assure us that all Cabinet members going forward will have risk on their agenda with regular meetings with their directors?
That's not a question for Nicola, that's a question for Councillor Ali.
No, I did ask.
Yes, with your permission. Yes. I mean, since I saw the papers for the last audit committee, I have raised this already with all Cabinet members, and there I've made reference to Cabinet Accountability Forum, and that's a forum of all Cabinet members and the deputies and executives on regular, which meets every Thursday, 10 to 12, 12:30, etc. And this is where I raised that too, to make sure that there is awareness at the highest level, and the Cabinet members are talking to their respective directors.
So is that a yes?
Answer is yes, definitely. Yes.
So
if it hasn't happened, it will happen, definitely, I can assure you.
So from me, you can expect that whichever Cabinet members come before any committee that I'm on, I will be asking them what their appetite for risk is and where they are on their risk register.
I mean, that's why I suggested
forewarning, Councillor Ali.
Yeah, that's all. That's why I suggested earlier that this is probably, rather than actually having audit and risk committee, you could easily raise this at the overview and scrutiny meetings with each of the director and the Cabinet lead there. Yeah.
Councillor Paul, incredibly quickly, and then really do bring this to a close.
I can't remember the Latin of it from school, but who checks the checker? Who checks the guardian?
His custodia, Tipsos Custodes.
Thank you, Conrad. So, yeah, and Councillor Ali, perhaps something for you to take away and think about with that council Councillor Chad said, don't mention the cabinet accountability model. I will, because no one checks the checker and who is the guardian. So when I do welcome what you just said there, but can we make sure when cabinet come, they do have an answer, but who looks over their shoulder, who checks them, are they being transparent? Could we all own the risk? We're all accountable for the council. It'd be useful if cabinet come to the next, whenever they come in front of scrutiny, with their list of risk, and they can tell us who checks them and what challenge they've had. Just a comment, Chair. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, I think if I very quickly, Chair, if I may, if you go back to the process that Fiona mentioned already in terms of the director level ownership, and then it moves to the DMT and CMT and the other processes. By the time it gets to the cabinet officer, cabinet member, the whole officer structure ought to have gone through that process, the rigorous process, to make sure that whatever is in this risk register is the latest, is up to date and realistic, and is what should be presented. So I would say that is a check and check, but we can also bring an internal audit if there's a need to be, if we have certain issues to be even further assured. I mean, that's something else we can look at. But I take your point. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Councillor Ali. So just bringing this item to a close, I think, you know, we've had a really good debate on this topic.
Good.
And going forward, I feel that scrutiny is a lot better informed about the work of audit. And I know from a personal point of view, if I keep my chair, and I'm sure the same goes for my fellow chairs, we will be sort of looking at what audit is doing as part of the process of informing our work programmes and what we need to be sort of looking at going forward. And we'll be holding the directors that we follow and the cabinet leads accountable for their risk registers. Are there any other concrete recommendations that have come out of this session beyond the fact that, you know, we will be hoping to see the right members sort of attending audit, and no gaps on the risk register, and no bits that are kind of out of date, and to get a far better sense that it's being checked on a more regular basis, and that it's working as it should be, functioning as a dynamic document. Is there anything anyone else wants to add?
Have we solved the dilemma of the breakpoint between audit and we haven't, have we?
No,
I feel we have.
Yeah, said audit.
Do we need to put like a little policy, like 2 point? How do we ensure that it doesn't go off beam down the road? Do we need like a 3 sentences or bullet points? This is what audit does. This is what overview does, and never the twain should meet. Is that what we need to do? Perhaps outside the meeting? Is that possible? I'm looking at.
Have you got any ideas about a 3-sentence?
Fiona, any comment? How do we actually agree something and stick with it for 9 months' time? We still stick with it. Well, Fiona was audit chair, perhaps through you, chair. Is that perhaps a conversation outside via you, email with Conrad, with chair of overview of scrutiny?
We can try that, Councillor Paul. I
Yeah.
will just say we've been trying to.
I know.
So, but yeah, but it does state that audit committee does have the principal role in risk management, so it is clear.
Exactly, but just trying to make sure, but overview doesn't overstep on that role. Maybe is where I'm coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the good thing is you've got 3 chairs sat in this meeting, so the majority of chairs are here, even if we don't unfortunately have the chair of overview tonight. So we will see that agreement is worked out going forward, and certainly I feel a lot more confident that the risk register will remain with audit, and we will hope to see an improvement in attendances and in the quality of the risk register. And we can then use that risk register to inform the kind of areas that we're sort of looking at in terms of our individual scrutiny work programmes. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to members of audit, to the officers of audit who've attended tonight, and I think have helped close that circle that may have been a gap in the past in terms of the operating.
Just to say, also, obviously, we've got the action planning on the scrutiny improvement review, the forthcoming review of the scrutiny executive protocol, so we can add in that clarity to those documents as well.
Fantastic. So I think those are the conclusions. Is there anything else anyone wants to add, or are we all happy with that?
Yeah, fine, lovely.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for attending, Conrad. Thank you, Nicola Wood. And is it true you're leaving the council?
It is. She is leaving, Chair. Yes, and I'd like to thank her for her services and wish her all the very best.
Bon voyage and very Merry Christmas to you.
Can we note in the minutes our appreciation for
Absolutely.
her work and service? And she's been a great servant to us on audit board and to me as a councillor in various committees. So thank you.
Thank you. So that's noted. And Fiona Marsh, thank you also for attending tonight's overview and scrutiny meeting. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you in the future. So thank you very much. We're now going to be sort of moving on to some committee housekeeping. So any officers who want to leave are very welcome to do so. And I'd like to sort of wish you a Merry Christmas and thank you for attending.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'll leave too in that case. Have a nice Christmas.
Okay,
Happy New
thank you
Year.
very much,
Thank you.
Councillor Ali.
Bye-bye.
We appreciate your attendance tonight.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
Bye. Bye.
So I move that Newham Council's arrangements for corporate governance, risk management and the main identified risks and mitigation measures have been noted, along with a number of actions coming out of that item. I now move on to item 7 on our agenda, which is appointments. The purpose of this item is to appoint members of the Scrutiny Commissions and the membership of external bodies as necessary. So the first thing I want to do, and I think he'd already sort of self-appointed before I was able to do this officially, is to appoint the chair for the Crime, Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Commission, who is Councillor Paul. So congratulations, Councillor Paul. The second thing I have to do is to, oh, sorry, I thought this had already happened.
Oh, thank you.
But yes, can we have a vote of the committee just to say that we approve? Yeah, thank you. So congratulations, Councillor Paul. So my second item is the appointment of the Budget Scrutiny Commission. We have updated membership. So that is where on the?
I think it's really just a clarification on Councillor Harvinder Singh's member.
Okay, so Councillor Harvinder Singh has been confirmed as an additional member of Budget Scrutiny. And also, do I need to confirm the member of the Green Group as well, as this is on my list?
Yes, the minority group.
The minority group member is Councillor Nate Higgins.
He's an existing member, but that has been reviewed recently.
Do I need to?
So we need to
confirm all the names on this list. Okay, so we've already welcomed Councillor Mahmood Mirza to the overview and scrutiny membership. So we're confirming that. And also Councillor Mahmood Mirza will be joining Crime, Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny. So congratulations for that. Councillor Sophie Knackley, we'd like to welcome her to the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission, and we can sort of vote on all this collectively, I think, at the end. Relationship between Black Boys and the Borough Scrutiny. I'd like to welcome Councillor Danny Keeling. And Councillor Danny Keeling has already been confirmed as a member of Health and Adult Social Care, Equalities and Air Quality Scrutiny. So I'm delighted that they will be continuing. In terms of the RBBB.
Chair, the relationship between Black Boys.
Oh, and the borough, sorry. Can we not use acronyms, please? I'd just like to say the commission membership of this committee going forward will be Councillor McAlmont, who'll be chairing, Councillor Belshika Guana, Harvinder Singh Verdi, Lakmini Shah, Lester Hudson and Susan Masters. And Paul Leslie, you're going to be a co-optee. So thanks very much for that. Local Plan Scrutiny Commission membership. Councillor Terence Paul, Chair. Councillor Rachel Tripp, Councillor Sasha Dasgupta, Councillor Lester Hudson, Councillor Nate Higgins, Councillor Anthony McAlmont, Councillor Susan Masters, Councillor Zubair Gula Merson, Councillor James Beckles, Councillor Ken Benton, Councillor Carolyn Corbyn, Councillor Simon Rush, Councillor Danny Keeling, and as sub, Councillor Nate Higgins. then the only other one I've got here is the Inner North East London Joint Health an Overview Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Danny Keeling.
Okay.
And Housing and Resident Experience Scrutiny Commission, Councillor Zubair Gula Marston, and I think that ends.
Sorry, do I need to be reconfirmed onto the budget working party?
Oh, in fact, yes, sorry for that oversight because.
And Leicester as well.
Joining that one.
Well, Lester Hudson was already on for budget, wasn't he?
I've got listed to budget.
Yes.
Councillor Paul.
Yes, so you're reconfirmed as a member of Budget Working Party.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So is everybody happy with all of those allocations?
Chair, just one minor point, and that is to confirm Councillor Terry Paul as chair as of that local plan scrutiny committee.
Okay, and so is everyone happy with that?
Are we all dotted the i's and crossed the t's? Thank you.
Fantastic. So we then come on to item 8, which is our progress report, pages 69 to 124 of the agenda. Purpose of this item is to consider a progress report to provide a brief update on responses to information requests made by the committee and any reports and recommendations to the executive. I think my comments are that I would rather not have some answers in the body of the text and some attached as appendices. I found that quite hard to follow. And I would also like to just double check that where a director has come back with an answer to some questions, but not others, that we will continue to pursue that information. Fantastic. Has anyone else got any comments on that section? So the other thing is the annual scrutiny work programme, which is pages 125 to 130 of the agenda. And I think somebody was talking about a timetable for Budget Working Party.
Yes, so that
You have this.
what I would say is I've got the respective dates for that, but I would say that the dates that we have in the agenda pack
Are they out of date?
agreed, but subject to further amendment at the next meeting.
Okay, so do you want me to confirm anything now for the committee?
The main thing to note, I think, at this stage is the confirmation of the next meeting of Open Scrutiny Committee will be Open Scrutiny Committee rather than budget.
Yeah, would it be to say because of the budget timetable has been moved, we're in a state of flux? So dates will be confirmed. So
yes, it's a good idea to agree the dates we've got.
Yeah.
Because we need to let people know that this was happening.
Have you got the timetable of dates?
Have they been tabled as in the papers?
Yeah.
So we can agree them, yeah?
Okay,
Yes,
so
in the agenda pack,
agreed.
Post agreed.
but subject to change at the next meeting.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, so the next date and time of the next meeting of the committee will be, is it still 25th of January 2024? Has anyone got any comments on the forward plan, item 12? No? Fantastic. In that case, then I would like to bring this meeting to a close at 9:00. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Celebrating, and those who are not, may you have a very restful pause in council activities.